Greetings, Torah scholars. Welcome back to Advanced Judaism for Beginners. Continuing on the topic, Mitzvat Yeshuv Haaretz, the mitzvah, the commandment of settling the land of Eretz Israel, part 3. I am Ashi, and welcome back again. So, in the past 2 weeks, we discussed the commandment of settling the land of Eretz Israel. We saw several commentaries on that. We also saw that namely the Maimonides, does not numerate the settling of the land as its own mitzvah per se. And we saw others, namely Nachmanides, that does count it. That was in the past 2 weeks. In the upcoming weeks, we're going to get a little bit political, and to some this might seem like a controversial topic. So I am asking, please, the viewers to take off when we're studying this topic. Let's take off our political lens and wear our curious and our open-mindedness lenses. And we're going to get closer to the topics of religious Zionism, anti-religious Zionism. So we're going to discuss all of that. And again, in general, in Advanced Judaism for Beginners, we approach the subjects with as much as we can, with open-mindedness, and let's see what do the sources in Jewish texts tell us. There is a quote being said by the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe that says something interesting. Don't learn the Torah, let the Torah teach you. Again, don't learn the Torah, let the Torah teach you. What's the difference? When someone learns the Torah, it means that he's learning, meaning first comes his ego, and he's trying to learn information from the Torah, and he'll tend to twist the information based on his agenda, his ego. That's what it means to learn the Torah. First comes you, then the Torah. The Fidik Rebbe, the previous Rebbe, is telling us, let the Torah teach you. When you're studying Torah, let it teach you. Put your ego aside, and let's see what the Torah itself tells us. So, again, sometimes it's a little bit hard to put our agenda aside, but we'll try to do it as much as we can. So with that introduction, there's another important introduction I need to make before we're jumping straight to today's topic. Today's topic, we will see the source of those who were religious and were anti-Zionists. Now, let's get some definitions and important notes clear out, and then go to the subject. When we're saying Zionist, in the modern definition, modern Zionism refers to it's a movement that modern Zionism started in the 19th century in Europe, and it was the idea of the Jews as mass migration moving to the land of Israel. Now, it was mostly, in its origin, it was a secular movement. Again, that started in the 19th century. Previous to that, you had various Jewish migration to the land of Israel, and mostly religious, but it was usually small, and usually the Jews that moved in the past 2,000 years after the destruction of the Second Temple, moved back to the land of Israel. It was mostly individuals that seeked some sort of a spiritual journey to the land of Israel, or a spiritual retirement in the land of Israel. That was throughout the history in the past 2,000 years. But in the 18th century, emerged a new movement, mostly a secular movement. It did not have religious elements to it. It was more nationalistic and historical movement. Jews that were motivated by history and by nationalism. So that is secular Zionism, the definition of that, of the modern Zionism. Now, in that movement, when that movement emerged, so some Jews became religious Zionists and supported that movement. Other Orthodox Jews opposed it and became anti-religious Zionists. And those two you have today as well. Though I do want to say, in the past 200 years, more Orthodox Jews became more I don't know if the word is sympathizing or even agreeing to Zionism, and the voice of the anti-religious Zionists became a bit less. But still exists definitely, especially here in New York. There's a large community, the Satmar community, who in its very nature of the leader, the Joel Teitelbaum that we will discuss, he was a very anti-religious Zionist. But anyways, I'm carrying ahead of myself. But like this, so again, there were religious Zionists and anti-religious Zionists. Now, one last important note. Even though there were various attitudes within the Orthodox Judaism, there were various attitudes to this modern movement of Zionists. Yes, there were various attitudes, but important note is that according to all of them, the Jews have the right to the Holy Land. And according to all Orthodox Judaism, all opinions in it, Jews one day will return to the land of Israel and rebuild the temple, the third temple in Jerusalem. And Jerusalem is the capital of the Jewish nation, according to all opinions in Orthodox Judaism. And according to all of the religious views in Orthodox Judaism, a theocracy, a Jewish theocracy, will be reestablished in the land of Israel. Theocracy meaning that the government will be a religious body being governed by halakha. And again, this might sound controversial, but even according to what we see today as those who are very anti-religious Zionists, Satmar, Neturei Karta, and again, we will discuss these groups later on, but even according to them, they all believe that one day we will return to the land of Israel and the third temple will be reestablished. So where do they disagree? The question is, how would that process look like? How would that process be? The process of returning to the land of Israel, would it be a divine process, something that we're waiting for a heavenly miracle, a heavenly signal? Or is it going to be a human process that will return to the land of Israel in a more natural phenomenons? They're arguing on the process. Could that process be done by secular Jews, or it must be done only through the leadership of religious Jews? So again, all of religious Jews believe that we will return to the land of Israel and the third temple will be rebuilt. The question is, how would that process look like? So that was an important introduction to bear in mind. Again, that there are various attitudes to modern Zionism among Orthodox Jews. However, all Orthodox Jews believe that we will return to the land of Israel and we will rebuild this third temple there and reestablish a halacha theocracy there. Just the disagreement is, how would that process look like, as we will see in the upcoming weeks. Okay, so with that introduction in mind, let's jump to today's topic. And today what we will see, that the source of anti-religious Zionism. And let's jump straight to it. So this is a portion that comes from the Talmud, in Ketubot, page 111a. I encourage everyone to look in that Talmud, and indeed it's a long discussion, and we'll bring other parts from that discussion later on. But I'm right now just selecting one portion of that, which is a very, very famous portion that comes from it. And just so you should know, this is the source of the anti-religious Zionist movement. And this portion from the Talmud is called the Shalosh Shvuot, the 3 oaths. Now, let's read it inside. So the discussion there is we're learning from the words of Song of Songs, which we'll get there soon. But based on the verses from the Bible, we learn that there are various oaths, shvuot, that God made the Jews take. So let's read. These 3 oaths from the Song of Songs are for what? The first oath is that Jews should not ascend to the land of Israel as a wall, as a forced wall. The understanding there, that first oath, that God made the Jews take an oath. This is on a spiritual level, that God made the Jews take an oath, a divine oath, that Jews should not return to the land of Israel as a wall, meaning as an organized movement, and take it by force, to return back from the diaspora and take the land of Israel by force. The second oath, the second oath is that Jews should not rebel against the rule of the nations of the world. So as the Jews were decreed to go to the diaspora, God made them take an oath on a spiritual level that they should not rebel against their host nations. And that's very much the attitude of Orthodox Judaism, that when Jews are in the diaspora by the host nations, they should not rebel against, and they should be obeying citizens in their host nations in the diaspora. The third oath, now the third oath is God made the non-Jews take, which is that the Holy One blessed made the nation adjured that the nations of the world, that they should not subjugate the Jews excessively, meaning that the non-Jews should not subjugate the Jews throughout the diaspora too much, more than suffice. Meaning, based on this, is that the diaspora, the galut, the exile of the Jews, was a decree, was a heavenly decree, and God made the non-Jews take an oath that that decree of the exile should not be done excessively, more than what is decreed. That is this passage from the Talmud. That, very interesting, that there are 3 oaths. The first one, God made the Jews take an oath that don't return to the land of Israel as a wall, meaning forcefully, take the land back forcefully. Second oath is that while they're in their host nations, in the exile, in the diaspora, they should not rebel against the non-Jews. They should be obeying citizens. And the third one, to the non-Jews, the oath is don't subjugate the Jews more than what is decreed. Very fascinating passage. Now, I just want to explain, this comes from the Talmud. Now, you would ask, the Talmud was compiled in the 5th century. You would ask, where does the Talmud know about these 3 oaths? What's where does it learn it from? So this is a classical Midrash teaching. Now, what is a Midrash? A Midrash comes from the Hebrew, the root of it, the root verb is drash, to seek, to learn out, to inquire. So a Midrash, when using the term a Midrash, what is the Midrash? Midrash means how the rabbis interpreted the biblical text, how they and they interpret it in an expansive way. From few words, sometimes they'll have a whole expansive learning and interpretation. So a Midrash is the system, the methodology of interpreting the biblical text based on the rabbis. And again, based on the rabbis means they did it in a divine, spiritual way, of course. Now, that's the study of the Midrash. And most of the Midrash that is being referred, it's actually, most of these interpretations were based on rabbinic works throughout the centuries. Usually people refer to it in the time of the Second Temple. So that is a Midrash. So now the Talmud is telling us about these three oaths. What is the source of it? As a Midrash, meaning it's a rabbinic work of interpreting the Bible itself. Now, in this case, what are they interpreting? And I mentioned it very briefly. In the book Song of Songs, which is part of the Jewish Bible, so this is considered a holy spiritual text that was written in a divine inspiration, Ruach HaKodesh, and it's part of the Jewish Bible. In there, in Song of Songs, there's mentioning of three different oaths. And again, the verses there actually that God made believe the daughters of Jerusalem or something like that take an oath, and it says it in three different verses. So the rabbinic interpretation is expanding on that and saying, what are these oaths that it's talking about? Because there in Song of Songs, it talks in a very vague language. Based on that, we have the Talmud three oaths of the Talmud three oaths that, do you want to know what's the interpretations of that? Is that we should not go as a forced wall, we should not rebel against the non-Jews, and the non-Jews should not subjugate the Jews too much. So this is a classical midrashic teaching that the Talmud gives us. And again, what is the midrashic teachings that in Song of Songs we have in a vague terms talks about these oaths, these shvuot, and that teaching is teaching us these three more practical instruction to the Jews of how to behave. Now, I want to make one last point, is that the Maharal, that's Rabbi Yehuda Lowy, he lived in Prague during the Renaissance time. He brings these three oaths in a deeper sense. He explains what's the idea of these three oaths is that God, when it was decreed that Jews should go to the exile, and again, that is based because the Jews in the land of Israel sinned, so that it was decreed that they will go to the exile. So the Maharal explains that exile, it's not a natural phenomenon. If you look at historical forces, no nation survived 2,000 years in the diaspora, in being among host nations. Usually, they'll just mix in. They would lose their identity. These three oaths are the three identities. These three oaths are essentially God is giving a decreeing, giving a heavenly decree that Jews will survive in the diaspora, will survive in the exile. Is Jews will, on one hand, they will remain in the exile. They cannot go back to the land of Israel until the day that God will choose otherwise. So they will remain there, but they will keep their identity because the non-Jews will not subjugate them too much. So essentially, these three oaths are essentially God making a decree that first there will be an exile and Jews will remain in exile as long as that exile is needed. and yet they will remain and they will survive and they will keep their identity in the exile. So, and now, and that's the represented by the third oath to the non-Jews. So the Maharal brings a deeper dimension to these three oaths by saying that this is a heavenly decree of how the Jews will remain in the exile and yet keep their identity there. So let's do a summary of what we discussed today. First, we made an important note that among all Orthodox Judaism, the Jews will return to the land, and the question is, how would that process look like? And we started to discuss the anti-religious position, which is based on this Talmud of the three oaths, and the three are not to take the land back as a wall, as a forced wall. Second one is not that the Jews should not rebel against the non-Jews, their host nations. And the third one, to the host nations, not to subjugate the Jews too much. These are the three oaths. We also discussed, how did the Talmud learn that? Where does that teaching come from? And we explained that this is a Midrash, in an expansive interpretation of the biblical text that is being compiled and documented in the Talmud. And we explained the Maharal's point that the idea of these three oaths is essentially God is decreeing, is giving strength to the Jews to keep their identity in the exile. One last personal note, by the way, I'm from Israeli background, already 20 years in the exile in the United States, but I'm originally from Israel. For me to pronounce wall and oath wasn't so easy. I practiced before. If I butchered it, please forgive me, okay? But I hope I came across clear. But anyways, thank you. Thank you for, on that side personal note, thank you for joining Advanced Judaism for Beginners. We will continue in the upcoming weeks on these topics. All the best.